Okay, settle in because we're about to take a deep dive into a story that seems, well, almost straight out of fiction.
It really does.
Imagine a college dropout starting out with just 100 rupees. I mean, that's genuinely less than $2, who somehow manages to build India's largest ports and energy empire.
And it didn't stop there. For a moment, he was right on the cusp of becoming Asia's richest man.
It's just an incredible trajectory. This isn't just a remarkable business story. It's the journey of Gautam Adani, a path that wound its way from the uh, intricate, high-pressure world of diamond trading all the way to the cutting edge of green energy.
It's a trajectory that really demands careful examination, doesn't it? Understanding not just the sheer scale of the achievement, but the how and the why behind it.
Exactly.
And that's really our mission in this deep dive. We're working solely from the source material you shared, and it's a collection that offers some fascinating insights into Adani's unique mindset and, the strategic choices that defined his rise.
Absolutely. Our goal for the next little while is to sort of decode that playbook. How did he see opportunities others missed? How did he systematically leverage fundamental infrastructure as the backbone of his growth?
Right.
What allowed him to not just survive, but actually strengthen his position through potentially catastrophic crises? And how did he position himself to be such a significant player in shaping India's and maybe even the world's energy future?
We're treating this as a bit of a masterclass, drawing directly from those materials, in the power of vision, in the critical importance of timing, and honestly, in the sheer audacity of scaling relentlessly.
Yeah, it goes beyond a typical business case study.
It really does. It's about a distinctive approach to building influence, navigating inherently turbulent waters, and identifying and solving foundational problems on a national and then, well, eventually a global scale.
And as always, the best way to understand the destination is to start at the origin. Before the immense wealth, before the sprawling empire, there was just a young man driven by a profound sense of restlessness and a hunger for opportunity.
Indeed. Gautam Adani was born in 1962 in the state of Gujarat, into what the sources describe as a modest Jain family. His father ran a small textile business, which provided a stable, middle-class upbringing, but certainly not one of inherited wealth or significant connections in big industry.
Right, no silver spoon there.
Not at all. And what immediately sets him apart in the narrative is his early relationship with formal education. He enrolled in Gujarat University to study commerce, but made the striking decision to drop out at the age of 18.
18, wow.
Yeah. And the materials are careful to note this wasn't because he was struggling academically. He was reportedly doing just fine.
So why drop out then?
Yeah.
What was the driving force if it wasn't bad grades?
It was that restlessness you mentioned. The sources characterize it as a feeling that the theoretical learning environment of university just wasn't moving fast enough or offering the kind of direct, tangible experience he craved.
Oh, okay. Wanted to get his hands dirty.
Exactly. He saw more value, more immediate opportunity in the real world than in textbooks and lectures. It was a bold declaration, really, a sign of his inherent bias towards action and practical engagement over, theory.
And that bias for action led him to make his first truly audacious move. He left home for Mumbai, India's financial capital, with an almost unbelievable amount of money in his pocket, just 100.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Less than $2, even back in the early 1980s. That's not just leaving home, that's throwing yourself into the deep end with essentially nothing to fall back on.
It speaks volumes about his confidence, or perhaps his sheer determination to forge his own path. Mumbai was, and still is, a city built on ambition, right? A place where deals happen fast and fortunes are made and lost.
Absolutely.
For someone arriving with virtually no resources, it was the ultimate test. It was his first big, calculated gamble on himself.
And the arena he chose was the diamond trade. Mumbai's diamond market in the 80s was legendary, incredibly competitive, kind of opaque to outsiders, and operating at breakneck speed. How did he even get a foot in the door, let alone thrive there?
Well, he started by working for Mahendra Brothers, which the sources identify as one of the prominent diamond merchants at the time. This wasn't like a formal internship or anything. It was plunging right into the operational heart of the business.
Just jumped right in.
Pretty much. And the environment was intense. I mean, imagine dealing with precious commodities where value is measured in tiny increments. Deals are often sealed with a handshake based on rapidly assessed trust.
High pressure.
And the global market forces impact prices minute to minute. Yeah, incredibly high pressure.
The source mentions this period taught him lessons few textbooks could teach. What were those real-world takeaways for the diamond floors? Like, what did he actually learn?
Oh, so many critical skills. First, the value and maybe the fragility of relationships and trust in high-stakes commerce. You had to learn to read people, assess their credibility, build rapport quickly because deals move too fast for, extensive due
Right,
diligence.
gut feeling was key.
Totally. Second, the art of negotiation in a truly cutthroat environment, understanding leverage, reading body language, knowing when to hold firm and when to compromise, all under immense pressure. Third, a deep understanding of market psychology and the dynamics of trading, the human element behind price fluctuations, the impact of rumors versus reality, the psychology of fear and greed driving decisions. It was about instinctively understanding value and risk in a tangible, high-value commodity.
It sounds like a relentless, unforgiving masterclass in business, especially for someone without connections. Was it truly that cutthroat?
Oh, absolutely. The diamond trade operates on very tight margins and requires constant vigilance. For a young man, an outsider without family history in the business, every single deal was a test. Every interaction was an opportunity to learn or be outmaneuvered.
Wow.
The sources portray this period as forging an incredibly sharp instinct for spotting opportunity and managing risk, and developing a resilience that would definitely serve him later. It was a brutal, but you could argue perfect training ground for his innate abilities.
But he didn't stay in Mumbai and become like a diamond king. He returned to Gujarat in the early 1980s. Had that Mumbai experience fundamentally altered his perspective?
Yeah, the sources indicate a pretty significant shift in his thinking. While his contemporaries might have been looking at establishing small, traditional trading or manufacturing businesses back in Gujarat, Adani's sights had expanded.
How so?
Well, the diamond trade, being a global commodity business, exposed him to supply chains, international logistics, and just the sheer scale of global commerce. He wasn't just thinking about running a successful shop anymore. He was thinking about building systems, about operating at a scale that could influence markets, not just participate in them.
And the opportunity he seized upon back home wasn't diamonds, but something seemingly much more pedestrian. Polymers, specifically PVC. This is around 1985, right as India was starting to liberalize imports.
That's right. India was beginning to open up its economy, making it easier to import certain goods. PVC, polyvinyl chloride, was a critical raw material for India's burgeoning plastic manufacturing industry. It might seem less glamorous than diamonds, sure.
Definitely less sparkly.
Yeah. But it was foundational to a rapidly growing sector. Adani saw this opening and just jumped on it.
Why was this seemingly unexciting business strategically important for his development? What did it teach him that maybe diamonds didn't?
It was a different kind of complexity, really. The diamond trade was about speed, intuition, reading people under pressure. The polymer import business, on the other hand, was about navigating complex government regulations, licensing, customs, tariffs, which were still pretty significant despite liberalization.
Bureaucracy, basically.
Lots of it. It was about managing foreign currency risks on large transactions, securing reliable global suppliers for a bulk commodity, and understanding the logistics of moving large volumes of material into the country. These were the intricate mechanics of international trade at scale for an industrial input. It was less about flashes of brilliance and more about, mastering the plumbing of global commerce.
And by 1988, this led to the formal founding of Adani Exports, the precursor to the massive Adani enterprises we know today. While it started with commodity trading, agriculture, energy, things like that, you said his underlying strategic thought was already different from just being a successful trader.
Fundamentally different, yeah. Even in those early days, his focus wasn't just on making a profit on individual transactions. The source suggests his mind was already grappling with the idea of controlling the entire value chain for the commodities he traded.
Interesting.
If he was trading agricultural products, he was thinking about storage and transport from the farm all the way to the port. If he was trading energy, he was thinking about how to get it inland efficiently. He wanted to influence, if not actually control, the entire flow of goods, recognizing that power lay not just in the product itself, but in its movement.
And this brings us to what the source identifies as his core, almost startlingly simple insight that became the bedrock of his entire empire.
Yes, it was the profound realization that for a rapidly developing country like India, the single biggest constraint to economic growth wasn't a lack of ideas or demand or even labor. It was infrastructure.
The basics.
The absolute basics. India's roads were congested, its rail network was strained, and crucially, its ports were incredibly inefficient. Ships waited offshore for days, sometimes weeks, just to get a berth. Customs clearance was agonizingly slow. Moving goods inland was a logistical nightmare.
It was like trying to power a modern economy using, I don't know, antique plumbing.
Exactly. The source captures it vividly, trying to run a marathon with a broken ankle. Adani saw this bottleneck everywhere he looked in his trading business, and the insight he derived was elegant in its simplicity and just powerful in its implications. If you could solve the infrastructure problem, if you could control the movement of goods, you could essentially create a massive competitive advantage and unlock value across the entire economy.
You wouldn't just be trading commodities.
You'd be indispensable to the flow of all commodities.
So he wasn't trying to invent a new widget or the next big app. He was trying to fix the basic circulatory system of the nation's economy.
Precisely. He recognized that while everyone else was focused on what was being bought and sold, the real opportunity, the real leverage, lay in how it was being moved. This strategic pivot, grounded in his own firsthand frustration with India's logistical inefficiencies, became the driving force behind his most ambitious projects.
And those early years, from the diamond hustle to the PVC imports and commodity trading under Adani exports, weren't just about accumulating initial capital then. They were shaping this unique strategic brain.
Oh, absolutely. The source emphasizes that this period wasn't primarily about building immediate wealth, though that happened too. It was about building the foundation, wiring his brain for systems thinking, for understanding scale, and for spotting those fundamental, often unglamorous needs that underpin a growing economy.
Right.
He was building capital, yes, but just as importantly, he was building networks, proving his capability in complex environments, and developing that reputation for seeing opportunities in foundational areas that others may be considered too difficult, too capital intensive, or frankly, just too boring.
So it was less about flash and more about building the underlying structure. Hustle, resilience, calculated risk on fundamental assets. That was the core of this period.
Exactly. This is where the grit was formed, where the long-term vision for controlling essential infrastructure really took root. It taught him that solving fundamental problems, even when they're messy and challenging, created a more powerful and maybe inevitable path to scale than just chasing fads.
Which brings us to that first truly monumental bet that transformed him from a successful trader into an infrastructure titan. Mundra port.
This was the direct consequence of that core insight about India's infrastructure bottlenecks. By the early 1990s, Adani's trading business was significant, but he was constantly held back by the very inefficiencies he observed day in, day out.
Right.
The source describes the situation vividly. Ships idling offshore, racking up massive demurrage costs, customs processes adding days or weeks to clearance, and inland transportation being unreliable and fragmented. It was just crippling for trade velocity.
And his solution wasn't to, lobby for incremental improvements or find slightly better existing ports. It was to build his own port from scratch.
A truly radical decision at the time. India's major ports were state-owned monopolies. Private ports. Practically unheard of. The idea of a private entity undertaking a project of this scale and complexity requiring vast land acquisition, serious engineering prowess, and immense capital was met with widespread skepticism. From industry, bureaucracy, even potential partners, it felt like a pipe dream to many.
A total pipe dream. But the source frames his approach not as asking for permission, but as building leverage.
Precisely. Instead of being constrained by the limitations of the existing system, he just decided to bypass it entirely by creating an alternative. In 1994, he secured a lease on a stretch of coastline near the Gulf of Kutch in Gujarat. And this location was not accidental. It was remote, underdeveloped, and lacked any existing infrastructure connections.
And most people would see that remoteness, that lack of infrastructure, as a massive disadvantage.
Right. And they did. But Adani saw it differently. He saw a blank canvas, as the source puts it, a place where he wasn't hemmed in by legacy systems, by bureaucratic hurdles embedded in existing ports, or by competing interests. He could design, build, and operate a port optimized for modern efficiency from the ground up, without compromising on integrating all the supporting infrastructure he knew he'd need.
But even a blank canvas required land. And the process of acquiring it sounds like a Herculean task in itself.
Oh, it was monumental. The source highlights this as a major early challenge. Acquiring land for over 500 separate plots from hundreds of different small landowners. This wasn't a simple government allocation or negotiating with one big company.
No, this was retail politics almost.
Exactly. It required years of painstaking, on-the-ground negotiation, navigating complex land records, dealing with community concerns, and deploying considerable patience and, let's be honest, local political savvy. It demonstrated his willingness to tackle messy, fundamental problems others would just avoid. It was a huge test of his persistence before any construction equipment even arrived.
And starting around 1995, the actual building began. But as you said, it wasn't just about building a dock. This was the manifestation of his systems thinking.
Absolutely critical. This was really the birth of the integrated ecosystem strategy that defines the Adani Group even today. He wasn't just building a port, he was building everything needed for a seamless trade hub. Alongside the berths and cranes, he simultaneously built dedicated road networks connecting to national highways,
Right.
laid down private rail lines reaching deep inland, constructed vast warehouses for storage, established reliable power supply infrastructure, and even facilitated the co-location of customs and administrative offices right there on site.
So the idea was to create a totally self-contained, optimized trade universe, cut out all the friction points.
Exactly, all under one management structure designed to eliminate those friction points inherent in fragmented logistics. This hub was named Mundra Port.
And that pivotal moment when the first ship finally docked in 1998, was it a big party?
The source describes it not as a grand celebratory event, probably because it was just the beginning, right? As the crucial turning point. With that single event, Adani ceased being just a commodity trader reliant on others' infrastructure. He became an infrastructure owner. And in a country where infrastructure was the primary bottleneck, this changed everything about his position and potential leverage in the economy.
And from that modest start, Mundra just exploded in scale.
It really did. It rapidly grew to become India's largest commercial port by a significant margin. The source gives that impressive statistic. As of FY24, it handles over 155 million metric tons of cargo annually. And look at the types of cargo: coal, containers, crude oil, agricultural products.
The stuff his other businesses needed?
Exactly. These weren't incidental. They were the very commodities that fueled Adani's trading business and were strategically vital for India's economy. It was built big, yes, but it was built smart to serve the specific needs of his burgeoning empire and the national economy simultaneously.
Precisely. This is the brilliance of building it as a central control node. Mundra wasn't conceived as a standalone port that just happened to be successful. It was the foundational hub around which other Adani Group businesses were strategically built and designed to operate synergistically. Can you give us some more concrete examples of how that vertical integration worked in practice, like day to day?
Certainly. Think about it. Adani power plants, some of the largest in India, were strategically located near Mundra port, specifically so they could receive imported coal directly from ships, minimizing transportation costs and delays. Adani Logistics developed and managed the inland rail and road networks connected exclusively to Mundra, ensuring rapid, controlled movement of cargo to destinations across India.
Okay.
Adani Wilmar, his massive edible oils and food business, utilized the port for importing raw materials and exporting finished goods. Even later ventures, like Adani Airports, you can see how they hint at a future vision of integrating air cargo logistics with sea cargo.
It's like each business was a limb connected to the central nervous system of the port.
That's a very apt analogy. This vertical integration created immense operational synergy and cost efficiencies. Each part of the ecosystem made the others more valuable. It eliminated reliance on external, often inefficient systems.
And the competitive advantage this created must have been enormous.
It was virtually insurmountable for many competitors at the time. While they were still navigating congested government ports, dealing with multiple, uncoordinated logistics providers, and facing unpredictable delays, Adani's customers could move goods through his integrated ecosystem with speed, predictability, and centralized control. It was, in effect, a private express lane for trade, operating at a scale no one else in India could match.
The source mentions this strategy sparked debate, though. Critics labeled it monopolistic, while supporters hailed it as visionary.
That tension is almost inevitable with such rapid, large-scale dominance, isn't it? Critics argue that by controlling such a critical piece of national infrastructure and integrating it so tightly with his other businesses, Adani was creating an unfair competitive landscape, potentially squeezing out smaller players reliant on public infrastructure.
Right.
Supporters, however, countered that he was solving a fundamental national problem that the government and existing players couldn't or wouldn't address effectively. They pointed to the efficiency gains and the sheer scale of investment and execution as proof of visionary entrepreneurship.
And the source, importantly, doesn't really endorse either label, but notes.
That it undeniably worked strategically. It achieved its objective of creating a dominant, high-leverage position in the economy and fundamentally changed the dynamics of Indian logistics. Whether you liked it or not, it was effective.
And the timing was crucial too, wasn't it? He got in early.
Absolutely. He began building Mundra in the mid-1990s, significantly before India's major push towards privatizing infrastructure really gained momentum in the 2000s. By the time potential competitors were even seriously contemplating building private ports, Adani was already a decade into operating and expanding Mundra. He had a massive head start in terms of infrastructure, operational experience, and established customer relationships.
So Mundra became more than just a port. It became a symbol of his whole strategic philosophy.
It really is. It embodies those core principles the source identifies. If the infrastructure doesn't exist, build it. If the regulations slow you down, find a way to get ahead of them. If the market can't keep up, create your own system. It proved in concrete and steel his belief that infrastructure is the ultimate leverage, and he had the foresight and the sheer will to build and wield it.
And speaking of leverage, the next major chapter involved leveraging a resource that seems almost diametrically opposed to his future ambitions.
Coal. That's right. It's a fascinating part of the story. Before Adani became synonymous with massive green energy projects, coal was the powerhouse, the financial engine that enabled his later, more futuristic bets. As we moved into the late 1990s and early 2000s, India was experiencing explosive economic growth, fueled by liberalization, industrialization, and rapidly increasing urbanization.
Huge energy demand.
Just enormous, urgent demand for energy. And at that time, coal was the most accessible, most reliable, and most cost-effective source. It formed the absolute backbone of India's electricity grid, generating over 50% of its power.
So while many entrepreneurs were chasing software services, Adani saw the fundamental, undeniable need for power and decided to dominate the most readily available source.
Exactly. He recognized that regardless of technological shifts down the road, India needed power, and it needed it now, in vast quantities and at a reasonable cost. That meant focusing on the entire coal value chain, securing mining rights, importing coal efficiently, transporting it, and converting it into electricity.
His initial significant move in this sector was that Mundra thermal power plant you mentioned earlier, connected to the port.
Yes, part of what would become Adani Power, and again, strategically located right next to Mundra Port. This wasn't a coincidence, obviously. It allowed for the direct import of coal, bypassing domestic supply constraints and logistical hurdles. The power generated could then be fed into the national grid or supplied directly to industrial zones using Adani's logistics network. It was that same integrated ecosystem playbook applied to energy.
But he didn't stop at just importing coal. He made a globally significant and highly controversial move to control the supply at its source.
That was the acquisition of the Carmichael coal mine in Queensland, Australia back in 2010. This was billed as one of the world's largest untapped coal reserves. The decision to proceed with this massive mine, especially as global sentiment was already starting to turn against fossil fuels, immediately ignited fierce opposition.
I remember the protests.
Oh yeah, it faced relentless political battles, massive, sustained environmental protests internationally and domestically in Australia, and literally a decade of legal challenges. It was hugely controversial.
Activists saw it as an ecological disaster in waiting. Many financial analysts saw it as a potentially stranded asset, right? A financial black hole as the world decarbonized. How did Adani perceive it amidst all this backlash?
The sources indicate he viewed it through a different lens, one of fundamental economics and long-term supply security for India. He believed India's growth would require significant coal imports for decades, regardless of global trends elsewhere.
Interesting perspective.
Controlling a vast resource at the source offered crucial supply chain security, price management, and a tangible asset base. Despite the immense pressure, the project pushed forward, and the first coal shipment from Carmichael eventually occurred in 2021. The source frames this as a kind of symbolic victory for his philosophy of relentless persistence and prioritizing what he saw as India's immediate energy needs.
And while battling on the international front with Carmichael, he was also rapidly expanding his coal and power footprint domestically within India itself.
Absolutely. Domestically, Adani Group aggressively secured coal blocks through government auctions, expanded thermal power generation capacity across multiple states beyond just Mundra, and crucially, built critical power transmission infrastructure via Adani Transmission. This wasn't just about generating power, it was about controlling how that power got to market.
Owning of the pipes again.
Exactly. By FY 2022, Adani Power had become India's largest private thermal power producer, boasting over 14 gigawatts of installed capacity, a huge amount.
And this massive build-out in coal and traditional energy wasn't just about meeting India's power needs, was it? It was about generating something else vital for his future plans.
Crucially, yes. It was about generating reliable, high-volume cash flow. Coal-fired power plants, once built and operational, provide relatively stable, long-term, asset-backed revenue streams. This provided the Adani Group with an essential financial muscle that nascent green energy projects, with their different investment profiles and subsidy dependencies at the time, simply couldn't offer. This was the steady, powerful engine pumping capital into the group.
And that capital was the fuel for the next, much more ambitious bets. The green stuff.
Precisely. The sources highlight that the predictable, substantial cash flow from coal and established infrastructure acted as the war chest. This capital was absolutely indispensable for financing the massive upfront investments required for future-oriented, but definitely riskier, ventures like large-scale solar parks, wind farms, and especially those pioneering steps into green hydrogen. It de-risked the balance sheet and provided the necessary scale for these nascent technologies.
So the source argues Adani didn't necessarily see coal as a final destination, but as something else entirely.
Yes, he treated it strategically as a bridge. He understood the undeniable reality of India's energy transition, that a country of its size and stage of development couldn't simply flip a switch from fossil fuels to renewables overnight. It just wasn't feasible.
Too much demand, too fast.
Exactly. The demand was too high, the need for energy security too critical, and the scale of renewable infrastructure required was immense. He recognized that building that green future needed massive capital today, and coal revenues, despite their environmental cost and the controversy, provided that capital.
And this strategy actually allowed him to find financial support in places others were maybe pulling back from.
Exactly. While many Western investors were increasingly restricted by ESG criteria from funding new coal projects, Adani found willing partners and continued political support in regions prioritizing energy access and economic development, most notably within India itself, but also in parts of Southeast Asia and Africa. This geopolitical arbitrage, as the source calls it, allowed him to maintain and even expand his traditional energy base even as global narratives shifted.
Creating this fascinating dual-track approach. It sounds almost contradictory.
It's a defining feature of his strategy, and one that definitely draws both praise and criticism. On one track, he built and operated a massive, profitable fossil fuel empire, which offered stability and attracted traditional infrastructure investors. On the other track, he aggressively pursued and invested in cutting-edge renewables, positioning himself for the future, and appealing to a different pool of progressive, ESG-focused capital.
And by 2025, the source notes the paradox is stark, a seemingly contradictory energy portfolio. He's got both.
It is a powerful paradox. He manages an empire that includes highly controversial coal mines and thermal power plants alongside some of the world's most ambitious solar and green hydrogen projects. The source suggests one is actively subsidizing the other. Critics see this as clear evidence of greenwashing, using renewable ambitions to deflect from a core fossil fuel business. Supporters argue it's a pragmatic, necessary approach to managing a real-world energy transition for a developing nation, where energy security and affordability are paramount today, even while building for tomorrow.
The source doesn't offer a definitive judgment, right? But it emphasizes the undeniable consequence.
The undeniable fact is that the revenue and asset base from coal and traditional infrastructure provided the crucial financial war chest. Without that foundation, the scale and speed of his pivot into renewables simply would not have been possible. Coal wasn't just black gold. It was strategic leverage, used to accumulate the power and capital needed to build something far bigger, a future-oriented energy landscape.
Which brings us squarely to that future, the massive, audacious bet on green energy. This feels like the current headline act.
It really does. This pivot became undeniably clear and gained immense momentum in the late 2010s. Several global forces converged. You had rapidly increasing global awareness and action on climate change, institutional investors significantly increasing their allocation to renewables, and, critically, the Indian government setting incredibly ambitious targets for renewable energy deployment, aiming for 450 gigawatt by 2030. That's a huge number.
Massive.
Adani, with his existing infrastructure base and that war chest of cash flow, saw the confluence of these factors as an unparalleled opportunity.
So it wasn't just following a trend, it was seeing a strategic convergence.
Huh.
He saw the writing on the wall and the money flowing.
Absolutely. The source characterizes it as a highly calculated move based on three fundamental truths he identified. First, India's energy demand was only going to grow exponentially, making it one of the largest, most attractive energy markets globally for decades to come. Second, global capital was increasingly flowing towards investments aligned with climate goals, specifically ESG criteria, offering a new, deep pool of financing he could tap into. And third, the sheer scale of India's need meant that whoever could build and integrate reliable, scalable, clean energy infrastructure would essentially dominate the future energy landscape. It was a huge prize.
And once he saw that opportunity, the bet was massive, in typical Adani scale. No small steps.
Enormous. Starting around 2020, Adani Green Energy Limited, AGL, emerged as the primary vehicle for this ambition. One of the key early moves was the acquisition of SB Energy India for a staggering $3.5 billion. This wasn't just buying assets, it was acquiring a significant operational renewable platform with assets already built. That move instantly propelled AGL into the top tier of renewable energy players in India.
But consistent with his playbook, it wasn't just acquiring assets, right? It was about building the system for green energy. Back to the ecosystem idea.
Precisely. His vision extends far beyond just owning solar farms and wind turbines. The source highlights his ambition to control the entire value chain for renewable energy within India. This means investing heavily in manufacturing capabilities from producing polysilicon, which is the raw material for solar panels, to fabricating the panels themselves, developing advanced battery storage solutions, and pioneering the production of green hydrogen. The stated goal is to make India a global manufacturing and export hub for clean energy technology, all integrated within the Adani ecosystem.
And the targets he's setting are just staggering in their scale. Almost hard to believe.
They are truly audacious. AGL's operational capacity reached 10.9 GWh in FY24 and grew rapidly to 14.5 GWh by May 2025. That's a remarkable 30% year-over-year growth. But the stated targets are even higher, 25 GWh by the end of 2025 and a mind-boggling 50 GWh by 2030. If achieved, this would potentially make AGL the largest renewable energy player globally.
50 gigawatts.
Yeah.
Wow. And the scale is perhaps best visualized by the project the source describes as the crown jewel of this strategy.
The Khavda Solar Park in Gujarat. The physical dimensions are almost unbelievable, slated to cover over 72,000 acres. For perspective, that's roughly 5 times the land area of the city of Paris.
5 times Paris.
Yeah. And the targeted generation capacity is immense, over 30 GW from that one location. The source aptly calls it a renewable city because of its sheer size and complexity.
And how does he pitch such a massive, ambitious project to global investors? What's the story?
The source describes his pitch as deceptively simple yet incredibly compelling. He basically tells investors, look, India possesses the essential ingredients: abundant sunlight, available land at scale, and a vast labor force. What it needs is the capital and the execution capability.
And he provides the execution.
Exactly. He positions the Adani Group as the entity that will handle everything else: securing the land, managing the complex engineering and construction, integrating with the power grid, navigating the regulatory landscape. It's leveraging India's natural advantages with Adani's proven execution muscle.
And stepping even further into the future, the Green Hydrogen Initiative, announced in 2022, seems like an even bolder leap, maybe even riskier.
It is a massive forward-looking gamble, absolutely. Adani Group committed an eye-watering $70 billion investment over the next decade to build what they aim to be the world's largest integrated green hydrogen ecosystem.
$70 billion.
Yeah. The core concept is elegant, though. Use the massive amounts of clean electricity generated by his solar and wind farms, like Khavda, to power electrolyzers that split water into hydrogen and oxygen. This green hydrogen can then be used as a clean fuel or chemical feedstock in industries that are really difficult to decarbonize otherwise, like steel production, fertilizer manufacturing, or even potentially in future heavy transport.
Right, they're hard to abate sectors.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes, futuristic play with the potential to fundamentally alter global energy dynamics and supply chains if it scales successfully. It's a huge if, but the ambition is undeniable.
And all this massive green investment is underpinned by that shrewd financial strategy you highlighted earlier, the coal money paying for the green future.
Absolutely. This is where the brilliance, or perhaps the sheer pragmatism, of the financial choreography comes into full view. The stable, predictable cash flow and balance sheet strength derived from the traditional infrastructure and coal businesses are used to de-risk these enormous renewable projects.
Makes sense.
These green projects often have long development cycles and different risk profiles than, say, an operating port or thermal power plant. By using old money from proven assets to finance New World ambitions, he makes the renewable projects more attractive to investors and lenders. Simultaneously, by visibly aligning with global climate goals and investing at this scale in renewables, the group becomes appealing to the growing pools of capital specifically mandated to invest in ESG-aligned assets. Sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, European investment funds, North American institutional investors. He's playing both sides.
So he's thriving in this space, operating in this paradox, being both the coal baron and the green energy visionary.
He absolutely is. It's a space few others occupy, or maybe even could occupy. He simultaneously criticized globally for his continued reliance on an expansion in coal and fossil fuels, while being lauded internationally for building potentially the world's largest solar parks and green hydrogen initiatives. The source suggests this paradox is where he is most strategically potent.
Because the bet isn't just environmental.
His bet on green energy isn't solely driven by environmental imperative, though that's part of the narrative. It's also a strategic extension of his fundamental playbook, a monopoly play to control the energy infrastructure of the future, just as he controlled the logistics infrastructure of today.
Applying that same core insight again. Control the infrastructure, control the market, own the whole system.
Exactly. He aims to own not just the production, solar, wind, hydrogen, but also the transmission, through Adani transmission, potentially the storage with batteries, and even the eventual distribution and use of this clean energy. It's about building an integrated, controlled ecosystem for the entire energy transition.
And by mid-2025, these grand ambitions aren't just theoretical plans on paper anymore. They're real.
They are becoming operational realities. Projects are being built at scale, assets are coming online, and importantly, many are becoming profitable, demonstrating the scalability of his model. Adani is positioning himself not merely as a participant in the global energy transition, but actively as one of its key architects, building the physical and logistical backbone needed to power the low-carbon economies of the future. And underpinning it all is that fundamental drive to build and wield control over essential systems.
But building an empire of this magnitude at this speed, in complex and often challenging environments, well, it inevitably attracts scrutiny and faces major hurdles. And for Adani, those hurdles manifested as significant empire-shaking crises.
They certainly did. The source notes that for an empire built so rapidly and with such ambition, a reckoning was almost inevitable. And for Adani, that arrived in full force in early 2023.
The Hindenburg bombshell. I remember that dominating headline.
Oh, yeah. On January 24, 2023, Hindenburg Research, a U.S.-based short seller known for its aggressive reports, released a highly critical report on the Adani Group. And the allegations were incredibly serious, far-reaching. They accused the group of engaging in stock manipulation and accounting fraud over decades, calling it the largest con in corporate history.
Strong words.
Very strong. The report detailed complex structures involving opaque offshore shell entities allegedly used to inflate stock valuations and conceal debt. It was explosive.
The market reaction was immediate and absolutely brutal, was it?
It's devastating. The report triggered a massive sell-off in Adani Group company shares. In the span of just 10 days following the report's release, the group's collective market value plummeted by over $150 billion. Gautam Adani himself saw his personal fortune evaporate at an unprecedented rate, knocking him from his position as Asia's richest person and dropping him significantly down the global wealth rankings. I mean, for most business leaders, a blow of this magnitude would be terminal. Game over.
But the source highlights something crucial about Adani's response. It says he didn't flinch, he recalibrated. What does that mean in practice?
That phrase captures it well. While the scale of the attack was immense, the sources portray Adani's response as demonstrating his core strength in crisis leadership and strategic risk management under extreme pressure. He didn't panic, apparently. He acted decisively to stabilize the situation.
What specific actions did he take in the immediate aftermath? What were the first moves?
Several key steps were taken very rapidly. Perhaps the most striking was the decision to cancel the $2.5 billion follow-on public offering, FPO, for Adani Enterprises. This was just 24 hours after the FPO had been fully subscribed.
Pulled the plug after getting the money?
Essentially, yes. It was an incredibly rare move in the corporate world, basically walking away from secured capital. The source suggests this was primarily a strategic move focused on optics and trust, prioritizing the protection of retail investors who might have subscribed at potentially inflated prices, and sending a signal to the market that he was focused on stability and credibility, even at a significant short-term financial cost.
He also moved aggressively to address concerns about the group's debt, which was a big part of the Hindenburg report.
Exactly. The Hindenburg report had hammered on concerns about high leverage. Adani Group responded by rapidly repaying debt. They notably repaid over $2 billion in loans that were backed by shares earlier than required, which sent a strong signal.
Paying back early is unusual.
Very. The group also publicly committed to further debt reduction, enhanced transparency in their quarterly financial disclosures, and began restructuring some businesses to simplify reporting structures. These actions were both financially stabilizing and, psychologically designed to calm nervous markets and try to regain investor confidence.
And despite all that turmoil, he managed to secure significant new investments relatively quickly, signaling external confidence returning, or at least stabilizing.
This was a really pivotal moment. Just months after the Hindenburg report hit, in March 2023, GQG Partners, a reputable global investment firm, invested $1.9 billion in Adani companies. This was the first major foreign investment after the crisis erupted and was seen as a critical vote of confidence from a respected external player.
They must have helped calm nerves.
Immensely. And this was followed by further investments from sovereign wealth funds from the UAE and Qatar. The source describes this as Adani quietly, strategically re-architecting the group's financial backbone, replacing potentially volatile market capital with more stable, long-term partners.
But the controversies and scrutiny didn't just disappear entirely after Hindenburg, did they? The source notes ongoing challenges.
That's right. The storm didn't fully pass. In November 2024, reports emerged from Reuters citing investigations into allegations that Adani Group had paid significant bribes, reportedly over $265 million between 2019 and 2023, to secure energy and infrastructure contracts. The group strenuously denied these allegations, of course, but it brought renewed negative headlines and scrutiny.
And there was, more recently, something involving the U.S.
Yes. In June 2025, another report surfaced, this time regarding a reported investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice into whether entities linked to Adani had potentially violated U.S. sanctions against Iran through offshore intermediaries. Again, these reports led to fluctuations and drops in the stock price, more negative press.
And through these subsequent waves of allegations and investigations, the empire hasn't collapsed. It's still standing, still operating.
It hasn't, and the source points to a recognizable pattern in his response to these ongoing challenges. Act fast, show strength, absorb the hit, and move forward. It seems to involve confronting the allegations publicly, taking some form of demonstrable action, whether financial or communicative, weathering the immediate market and reputational damage, and critically, not allowing the crises to halt the underlying business operations or derail the long-term strategic plans. Keep building.
This remarkable ability to absorb such intense, prolonged pressure must be tied to fundamental strengths built into the empire itself, surely. It can't just be personality.
Oh, it absolutely is. The source links his resilience directly to several core strategic principles that underpin the Adani Group. First, diversification. The sheer breadth of the group across multiple, often distinct sectors. You've got ports, power generation, electricity transmission, airports, data centers, cement. Even defense tech now provides a crucial layer of resilience.
So not all eggs in one basket.
Exactly. If one sector or business is facing pressure, regulatory hurdles, or reputational damage, others continue to generate cash flow and provide stability to the overall group. It's a portfolio effect protecting the whole. Pressure on one leg doesn't necessarily bring down the entire structure.
Makes sense. What else?
Second, geographic spread. While India is clearly the core market, having significant assets and operations internationally in Australia, the UAE, Indonesia, Kenya, Sri Lanka, and now active plans in the US and Vietnam provides a geographic buffer. International assets offer alternative revenue streams and potentially mitigate localized regulatory or political risks within India itself.
The source also points to a significant factor that attracts both support and criticism.
Yeah.
His relationship with the government in India. How does that play into resilience?
Yes, strong government alignment. The source presents this point carefully, acknowledging the differing perspectives. Critics often argue that the Adani Group's perceived close ties with the Indian government provide insulation from scrutiny and potentially result in preferential treatment in securing large national contracts, particularly in infrastructure.
The crony capitalism argument.
That's the criticism, yes. Supporters, on the other hand, contend that Adani's strategic focus on critical national infrastructure and energy development, which are priorities for any growing economy, naturally positions him as a key partner for government initiatives. The source remains neutral on the underlying why, but highlights this alignment as a discernible factor in the group's ability to navigate complex domestic situations and secure large-scale projects vital to national goals.
Okay. And during the peak moments of financial panic, like right after Hindenburg, what was key then?
Rapid liquidity management was absolutely critical. His ability to quickly access and deploy significant amounts of cash like that, over $2 billion in early debt repayment, is paramount during moments of market panic. Having sufficient liquidity allows a group to meet obligations, reassure creditors and investors, buy time to implement strategic responses, and demonstrate financial soundness when faced with widespread doubt. It differentiates a temporary, albeit severe, setback from a potential cascading collapse. Cash is king in a crisis.
And underpinning all this, there's an element that's perhaps less tangible but maybe just as powerful: the story he tells, the narrative.
Absolutely. Narrative control is an often underrated strategic asset. Adani understands that markets and public perception react not just to financial numbers, but to the narrative surrounding a company and its leader. His consistent counter-narrative during these crises is powerful and straightforward. India needs massive infrastructure to realize its economic potential. His group is uniquely capable and committed to building it at an unprecedented scale, and the controversies and turbulence are simply the inevitable price paid for operating with such ambition and speed in a rapidly evolving landscape. He frames his empire as essential to India's future growth story.
And according to the source, where does all of this leave the Adani Group by mid-2025? Have they fully recovered?
Well, fully recovered might be too strong, as several investigations and controversies are ongoing and unresolved. However, the immediate existential crisis appears to have been weathered. Investor confidence, though perhaps still sensitive to negative headlines, has gradually returned, evidenced by those new strategic investments. Critically, the core businesses continue to perform strongly. AGL is hitting its ambitious renewable capacity milestones. Ports like Mundra are operating at record volumes, and new infrastructure projects across various sectors, from green hydrogen facilities to smart airports, are still being pursued and developed. The machine keeps moving.
It sounds like true leadership isn't just about achieving success, but maybe fundamentally about how you respond when everything goes wrong and you face relentless pressure.
That's a central takeaway from this part of the narrative, I think. Adani's leadership is tested and defined when facing hostile reports, public scrutiny, and market collapses. The source acknowledges the serious nature of the accusations and controversies he's faced, suggesting potential issues or questionable practices definitely exist. However, it also highlights his unusual and formidable capability to confront severe risk head-on, adapt strategies rapidly under fire, demonstrate resilience, and critically, maintain an unwavering focus on a long-term vision for the empire amidst the storm.
And that resilience loops back to where we began, doesn't it? His early days.
It absolutely does. For a man whose foundational business education involved navigating the unpredictable, high-pressure, trust-based environment of the Mumbai diamond trade, crisis is not an unfamiliar concept. It's simply another form of intense pressure. And as he has consistently demonstrated, pressure can be managed, absorbed, and strategically navigated. In fact, when handled with speed and resolve, that pressure can ultimately be a source of consolidation and power.
So by 2025, Adani hasn't just built an Indian empire. He's clearly operating with the mindset and reach of a global infrastructure strategist. He's thinking much bigger now.
That's the picture the source paints with his expansion strategy. His ambitions are now explicitly transnational, and this global reach is structured around that clear, methodical framework we discussed earlier. 3 pillars: infrastructure, energy, logistics.
And this 3-pillar approach is how he's systematically expanding his influence across continents, shaping trade and energy flows.
Exactly. This framework is his blueprint for shaping global trade flows, influencing the transition to cleaner energy sources, and building the foundational physical and digital connectivity needed for future economic growth from Asia to Africa, and even establishing a significant presence now in North America.
Let's look at the first pillar again, infrastructure, but on a global scale. This seems to be a direct export of his successful Indian model, particularly Mundra.
It really is. His core understanding remains the same. Control the fundamental systems that economies rely on. On the global stage, this means strategically acquiring, building, and operating ports, airports, highways, and large-scale industrial or logistic zones. The Mundra playbook is being replicated wherever geopolitical and economic opportunities align.
Where are we seeing concrete examples of this international infrastructure strategy in action?
The source provides several key examples. In Australia, beyond the controversial Carmichael mine itself, the project is underpinned by a private rail line that Adani owns, ensuring controlled transport for his resource exports right to the port. In Kenya, the group is involved in developing container terminals and associated inland logistics zones, positioning itself as a key player in East African trade connectivity. Strategically very significant is the $700 million contract Adani Ports secured to develop the West Container Terminal at Colombo Port in Sri Lanka, a vital hub along major global shipping lanes.
And his move into operating major airports in India, 7 of them now, seems linked to this global infrastructure vision as well, doesn't it? Connecting the dots.
Absolutely. By 2025, Adani Group operates those 7 major airports in India, including critical hubs like Mumbai and Lucknow. But the source notes they're actively exploring partnerships and opportunities in aviation infrastructure in Southeast Asia and Africa. The long-term vision seems clear. Control the air and sea gateways that define a nation's connection to the global economy.
Okay, pillar 2 is energy, continuing that dual-track approach internationally. Coal and green side by side.
Yes, exactly. While navigating the complexities of legacy fossil fuel assets globally, like in Indonesia, the aggressive expansion is undeniably focused on green energy abroad. The massive $70 billion renewable investment plan isn't confined to India's domestic projects like Kavda. It has explicit international components.
Where is he building this global green energy footprint? Where are the big bets outside India?
The source highlights significant moves. In the United States, the Adani Group has pledged over $10 billion towards clean energy infrastructure, including plans for large-scale hydrogen production facilities and solar panel manufacturing plants, notably in Texas. In Vietnam, they have announced plans to co-develop offshore wind projects, tapping into that region's significant renewable potential. And in Indonesia, alongside managing existing coal operations, they are initiating new renewable energy projects.
And the strategy behind that pairing of old and new energy in places like Indonesia, what's the thinking there?
The source suggests it's a pragmatic approach. It allows Adani to maintain relationships and operations in economies that still require fossil fuels today, while simultaneously aligning with their future sustainability goals. It positions him as a partner capable of guiding economies through a complex transition, rather than simply abandoning them or forcing an immediate, potentially disruptive shift. It's about navigating the nuances of global energy needs and policies, country by country.
And the third pillar, logistics, seems to be the essential glue holding this growing global empire together, connecting infrastructure and energy.
It absolutely is. Adani's understanding is that controlling the physical assets, infrastructure, energy sources is powerful, but optimizing the flow between those assets is key to true efficiency and scalability. His mastery of logistics in India, building Adani Logistics into a national backbone for freight, depots, and cold chain management, is now being applied globally.
How is this logistics pillar expanding internationally? What does that look like?
He is investing heavily in both the physical and the digital aspects. This includes developing sophisticated digital platforms designed to integrate port operations, warehouse management, inland transportation, and even linking up with retailers and end users into a seamless supply chain system. The source even mentions exploration into technologies like drone cargo systems under Adani Defense, hinting at future innovations in delivery. And he's establishing integrated, smart logistics hubs in key regions in Africa and Southeast Asia, aiming to help those developing economies potentially leapfrog older, less efficient logistical models.
Wow. Okay, so when you combine control over these 3 pillars, infrastructure, energy, and logistics across multiple countries, controlling both the physical and the digital layers, the source uses a very striking term to describe the resulting entity.
Yes, they describe it as building a shadow state. The idea is that by owning and integrating such fundamental infrastructure and operational systems across diverse sectors and geographies, the Adani Group is creating a private empire that functions with a level of scale, coordination, and strategic importance traditionally associated only with nation-states. It's a parallel network of essential services and infrastructure that economies increasingly rely upon.
And this global expansion isn't just random acquisitions, it's executed with strategic precision. It's planned.
The source emphasizes this point strongly. Adani didn't just chase random opportunities. He meticulously studies geopolitical shifts, identifies policy openings in different countries that favor private infrastructure investment, and spots regulatory gaps or national priorities that align perfectly with his three-pillar model. He's also willing to move with speed and commit significant capital when Western companies might be slower due to internal complexities or different ESG hurdles or political risk assessments.
And he tailors the pitch.
Exactly. He actively aligns his investments with the national development narratives of the host countries, whether it's India's focus on infrastructure, Make in India, the U.S.'s clean energy goals, Build Back Better, for example, or Southeast Asia's energy transition needs. He positions himself not just as an investor, but as a partner or even a nation builder in these contexts, which helps smooth the path.
So by 2025, his footprint extends across, over 10 countries now.
Yeah.
Built on the principle that controlling fundamental infrastructure is the key to unlocking value and power on a global scale.
That's the powerful conclusion of this section of the analysis. It's a strategy rooted in the belief that if you build and control the essential pathways, the ports, the power grids, the logistics networks, the digital links that future economies depend on, you are not just participating in global growth, you're actively shaping its structure, speed, and direction.
This deep dive into Gautam Adani's journey, drawn purely from the source material we have, reveals a strategic blueprint far more complex than just, accumulating wealth. It's really a masterclass in building leverage, navigating existential crises, and scaling a vision with relentless determination, often in the face of immense opposition.
Absolutely. And looking back at the narrative woven by the source material, we can synthesize some powerful lessons that I think resonate far beyond the world of ports and power plants.
Okay, let's distill those. What would you identify as the first key lesson from the Adani Playbook based on these sources?
Lesson one, I'd say, is build the backbone before the brand. Adani didn't focus on creating a globally recognized consumer brand from the outset, did he? He built the fundamental, often unglamorous infrastructure that enables all other businesses, the ports, the power plants, the logistics networks. The lesson here seems to be that while flashy consumer brands capture attention, the foundational businesses that serve as the economy's plumbing often provide deeper, more resilient leverage. You build the essential structure first, the brand follows, or maybe doesn't even need to be the focus.
Interesting. Okay, lesson one. Focus on fundamentals. What's lesson two? It links back to his financial strategy, right?
Lesson two, use old money to build the new world. A critical part of his success, as we discussed, was leveraging the stable, predictable cash flow from traditional assets like coal and existing infrastructure to fund significantly riskier, capital-intensive ventures like large-scale renewables and green hydrogen. It's a vital lesson in strategic capital allocation. You need yesterday's established profits and assets to effectively finance the uncertain, high-potential ambitions of tomorrow. Don't discard the old engine until the new one is fully built and running.
Lesson three brings back that concept of interconnectedness, the ecosystem.
Lesson three, play long-term. Think in systems. Adani didn't build a collection of siloed companies that just happened to share a name. As exemplified by Mundra Port and its surrounding businesses, every piece of the empire is designed to integrate and reinforce others. The power plant relies on the port, logistics serve both, airports add connectivity, energy fuels it all. The lesson is clear. Avoid building isolated components, intentionally design interconnected ecosystems where synergy makes the whole significantly more valuable than the sum of its parts. His mindset seems to operate on multi-decade horizons and integrated systems, not just quarter-to-quarter results.
Lesson four is deeply tied to his experience with crisis, particularly Hindenburg.
Lesson four, crisis is inevitable. How you respond is optional. The Hindenburg report and subsequent challenges were immense tests, no doubt. But his response pattern, acting swiftly, demonstrating financial strength, improving transparency where needed, securing new strategic partners, shows that reputation, credibility, and stability are not passive states. They are actively defended, strategically and financially, when faced with doubt and attack. He didn't crumble. He recalibrated and pushed forward, illustrating that resilience in crisis is a strategic outcome, not just a personality trait. You have to manage the response.
And finally, lesson five, relates to his global footprint, how he expands.
Lesson 5. Think global, but customize local. As he expands internationally, he doesn't apply a single rigid template everywhere. He adapts his approach to the specific political, economic, and regulatory context of each country. By aligning his investments with national development priorities and positioning himself as a partner or nation builder, he navigates complex international environments more effectively and builds local buy-in, which is crucial despite the controversies that may accompany him from elsewhere.
So the overarching takeaway from the source material regarding the Adani blueprint: building real power and scale requires something beyond just conventional business acumen. It takes a unique mix.
It really seems to require an extraordinary combination of deep foresight to see fundamental needs others overlook, impeccable timing to seize opportunities when they are ripest, the strategic understanding and willingness to build and deploy leverage effectively, immense resilience to withstand inevitable storms, and frankly, the sheer courage to operate and think on a scale and timeline that transcends typical business cycles.
And you don't need to be building ports or power grids to draw valuable insights from this story, right? The lessons about vision, leverage, systems thinking, and crisis response seem pretty applicable whether you're building a company, leading a team, or even just thinking about your own long-term trajectory.
Absolutely. You just need to ask yourself those fundamental questions, echoing the strategic choices Adani apparently made, according to these sources. Am I focused on building something truly fundamental, something that solves a core enduring need for the economy or society? Am I thinking in terms of interconnected systems and decades, not just the immediate project or the next quarterly result?
Because in the end, a legacy of this scale isn't just accidentally stumbled upon or simply earned through incremental growth. It doesn't just happen.
No, it is engineered. It is built deliberately, often by identifying foundational needs, leveraging existing strengths to fund future ambitions, integrating complex systems, and weathering immense pressure along the way.
And perhaps that leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for everyone listening, one that builds on the source material but pushes us to consider the broader implications.
Yeah.
We touch on the shadow state idea. What does it actually mean for global governance, for competition, and maybe even for the nature of national sovereignty when a private entity can build and control essential infrastructure and logistics networks with the scale and coordination that rivals the state, operating effectively as a shadow state across continents?
Yeah, that's a huge question. It raises complex issues about accountability beyond national borders, doesn't it? The potential for private interests to shape public priorities through their control of essential infrastructure, and the evolving relationship between private enterprise and state power in an increasingly interconnected and maybe fragmented world. It's a dynamic that is perhaps one of the most significant, albeit less discussed, consequences of building an empire using Adani's unique blueprint. A lot to think about there.
Definitely a lot to consider from this deep dive into the sources.